Part 1. Arrival before Christmas asterisk. The train slowed with a protesting sigh as it cut through the snow-laden countryside of southern England. Beyond the frost-covered windows stretched a white, silent world, broken only by bare trees whose branches clawed at the gray winter sky. Inside the first-class carriage, Hercule Poirot sat immaculately dressed, his patent leather shoes spotless despite the weather, his mustache waxed to perfection. Poirot disliked the cold. He disliked disorder even more. Snow, he had often remarked, was the very embodiment of chaos, falling where it pleased, refusing symmetry. And yet, as he adjusted his scarf and glanced at his reflection in the glass, his sharp eyes gleamed with interest. Christmas, he knew, brought out the best in people. And the worst. Across from him sat a young woman, nervously twisting her gloves in her hands. She had introduced herself earlier as Miss Eleanor Ashford, secretary to Sir Reginald Hawthorne, the man whose invitation had summoned Poirot to Hawthorne Manor just days before Christmas. "You are certain, Mademoiselle," Poirot asked gently, "that Sir Reginald did not explain why he wished to see me?" Eleanor hesitated. "He only said it was urgent and private. He insisted you arrive before Christmas Eve." Poirot raised an eyebrow. Urgency, secrecy, and Christmas Eve. An intriguing combination. The train jolted to a halt at a small, nearly deserted station. A single lamp cast a pale circle of light on the snow-covered platform. "Hawthorne Crossing," announced the porter. Outside, a black motor car waited, its engine humming impatiently. The driver, a broad-shouldered man with a rigid posture, tipped his hat. "Mr. Poirot, I'm James Fletcher, Sir Reginald's chauffeur." As the car wound its way through narrow country roads, Hawthorne Manor slowly emerged from the darkness, a grand stone house, its windows glowing warmly against the cold night. Wreaths adorned the doors, and garlands lined the balcony. But to Poirot's practiced eye, the decorations felt like a mask, cheerful, deliberate, concealing something beneath. Inside, the manor buzzed with activity. The scent of pine, polished wood, and roasting chestnuts filled the air. Servants moved briskly, preparing for the Christmas Eve gathering. Sir Reginald Hawthorne awaited them in the drawing room. He was a tall man, silver-haired, with sharp features and restless eyes. Though he smiled upon seeing Poirot, the smile did not reach his eyes. "Monsieur Poirot," Sir Reginald exclaimed, extending his hand. "I cannot tell you how relieved I am that you came." Poirot studied him carefully. A wealthy industrialist, yes, but also a man under strain. "You honor me, monsieur," Poirot replied. "But I confess, I do not yet understand why I am here." Sir Reginald glanced toward the door, then lowered his voice. "Because I believe someone in this house intends to destroy me." Poirot did not react outwardly. Inside, his little gray cells stirred eagerly. Sir Reginald gestured toward the fire. "You see, Christmas brings family together. Old friends, too. But it also brings old resentments." Poirot noticed the slight tremor in the man's hand as he poured brandy. "Who will be staying here, monsieur?" Poirot asked. Sir Reginald hesitated, then replied carefully. "My daughter, Victoria Hawthorne, clever, ambitious. My nephew, Charles Hawthorne, charming but drowning in debt. My sister-in-law, Margaret Bell, who believes I ruined her life. Dr. Alistair Munro, an old friend, or so I thought. And a few others, each with their own reasons for resentment." Poirot nodded slowly. "And the threat, monsieur? Did it come in a letter? A word spoken?" Sir Reginald's face darkened. He reached into his pocket and produced a small folded note. Only 3 words were written upon it: "Before Christmas ends." Poirot examined the handwriting with care. "A warning timed for drama," he murmured. "Very interesting." At that moment, laughter echoed from the hallway as guests began to arrive. Footsteps, voices, the clinking of glasses, the sound of celebration. Yet Poirot felt it keenly, beneath the joy. Something sharp and dangerous waited. Later that evening, Poirot stood alone by the drawing-room window, watching snow fall softly upon the garden. Behind him, voices mingled, polite, cheerful, carefully controlled. He turned slowly, observing them one by one. The daughter who smiled too easily. The nephew whose eyes flickered with calculation. The friend who avoided Sir Reginald's gaze at. Yes, Poirot thought. Christmas Eve would indeed be memorable at Hawthorne Manor, and not for the reasons they imagined. Asterisk. Part 2. The Locked Drawing-Room Christmas. Eve descended upon Hawthorne Manor with deceptive warmth. The great hall shimmered beneath chandeliers, their light reflecting off polished silver and crystal glasses. Holly and ivy wound their way along the banisters, and a towering Christmas tree stood proudly near the fireplace, adorned with ornaments collected over decades. Laughter echoed through the rooms, polite and measured, the sound of people performing happiness. Hercule Poirot observed it all from a comfortable armchair, his hands folded neatly atop his walking stick. He did not participate much in conversation. Instead, he watched. People revealed far more when they believed themselves unobserved. Sir Reginald Hawthorne moved from guest to guest, playing the genial host, yet Poirot noted the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted toward the clock above the mantelpiece. Time weighed heavily upon him. Dinner was announced promptly at 7. The long dining table littered beneath candlelight. Guests took their seats according to some unspoken hierarchy. Poirot, as guest of honor, sat to Sir Reginald's right. To his left sat Victoria Hawthorne, her posture elegant, her expression coolly intelligent. Across the table, Charles Hawthorne laughed a little too loudly at nothing in particular, while Margaret Bell sipped her wine in silence, her lips pressed thin. The conversation flowed easily enough. Politics, weather, holiday plans, but beneath it lay currents of unease. Poirot leaned slightly towards Sir Reginald. "You expect something tonight, monsieur?" Sir Reginald's fork paused mid-air. "I expect clarity," he said carefully. Dinner ended without incident. Coffee was served in the drawing room, where a fire crackled cheerfully. Outside, snow continued to fall, thick and relentless. Sir Reginald rose suddenly. "Excuse me," he said. "There are some papers I must review before midnight." Victoria frowned. "On Christmas Eve?" "Business does not respect holidays," Sir Reginald replied curtly. He turned to Poirot. "Monsieur, may I speak with you later? In private?" "Mais oui," Poirot said calmly. Sir Reginald left the drawing room. Closing the door behind him, the guests resumed their conversations. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. At 8:30, Margaret Bell glanced at the clock. "Isn't it strange?" she said softly. "Reginald never misses Christmas Eve brandy." Victoria stiffened. "Father dislikes interruptions." Another 10 minutes passed. Poirot felt it then, a subtle tightening of instinct, like a string drawn too taut. "Mademoiselle," he said to Eleanor Ashford, "would you be so kind as to see if Sir Reginald is well?" Eleanor rose at once and left the room. Moments later, a scream shattered the evening. Guests leapt to their feet. Poirot was already moving. They followed Eleanor down the corridor to Sir Reginald's private drawing room. The door stood closed. I knocked," Eleanor sobbed, but there was no answer. James Fletcher pushed past them and tried the handle. "It's locked," he said. Poirot stepped forward. "From the inside?" "Yes, sir." A servant fetched the spare key. The door was unlocked and pushed open. Sir Reginald Hawthorne lay slumped at his desk. The fire burned low. Papers were scattered across the desk, untouched. A glass lay shattered near his hand. His eyes stared sightlessly at the ceiling. For a moment, no one spoke. Poirot approached slowly, kneeling beside the body. He did not touch it. He only observed. "There's no sign of struggle," he murmured. Dr. Alistair Monroe stepped forward, his face pale. He checked Sir Reginald's pulse, though it was unnecessary. He's dead, the doctor said quietly. Likely poison. Victoria gasped. Charles swore under his breath. Margaret Bell closed her eyes, a strange expression crossing her face. Not grief, but something closer to relief. Poirot stood and surveyed the room. The windows were locked. The door had been locked from the inside. No one had entered since Sir Reginald left the drawing room. A perfect locked room mystery. Inspector Graves arrived shortly thereafter, snow clinging to his coat. He listened carefully as events were explained. An unfortunate accident, the inspector said finally. Poison perhaps taken by mistake. Poirot's mustache twitched. Accident? He said softly. Non mon ami. This was no accident. Inspector Graves frowned. The room was locked. No one could have entered. Poirot gestured toward the desk. Then we must ask ourselves a more interesting question. He pointed to the shattered glass. How did the poison reach him? Before Christmas ended? Outside, the church bells began to ring faintly in the distance. Christmas Eve had turned deadly. Part 3. 10 Guests, 10 Secrets. Morning light crept reluctantly into Hawthorne Manor, pale and cold, revealing the previous night's gaiety as nothing more than a fragile illusion. The snow lay heavy upon the grounds, muting sound and sealing the house from the outside world. Christmas Day had arrived, but joy had not got Sir Reginald. Hawthorne's body had been removed at dawn. The manor felt altered, as though the walls themselves now listened. Hercule Poirot stood by the window of the breakfast room, carefully adjusting his mustache as he observed the guests assembling one by one. No one spoke loudly. Cups clinked against saucers with exaggerated care. Eyes avoided one another. Inspector Graves arrived shortly after 9, stamping snow from his boots. Well, Monsieur Poirot, he said grimly, we're dealing with a house full of suspects. Poirot inclined his head. Just so. And each one, I think, carries not only grief, but secrets. Graves sighed. Let's begin then. Victoria Hawthorne Victoria sat straight-backed in the library, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. You were with the guests all evening? Poirot asked gently. Yes, she replied. Until father left us. And your relationship with him? She hesitated. Difficult. He did not approve of my independence. Poirot noticed the emphasis. You stand to inherit, mademoiselle. Yes, but inheritance does not replace freedom. A faint pause followed. And last night? Poirot pressed. I never left the drawing room. Inspector Graves glanced at Poirot. No evidence. But tension lingered. Charles Hawthorne Charles lounged in his chair, though his foot tapped nervously. You were in debt, Graves said bluntly. Charles laughed weakly. Who isn't these days? Poirot smiled thinly. Your uncle had recently refused you a loan, non? Charles stiffened. That's irrelevant. And yet, Poirot said softly, you quarreled with him earlier that day. Charles avoided his gaze. Words are not murder. Margaret Bell Margaret received them coldly, seated near the fire. My brother-in-law was a tyrant, she said flatly. He ruined my husband. You hated him, Graves said. I did, she replied. But I did not kill him. Poirot studied her hands, steady, unshaken. Hatred, Poirot murmured, is sometimes too obvious. Margaret's lips tightened. Dr. Alistair Munro, the doctor, appeared exhausted, his spectacles sliding down his nose. You declared poisoning, Poirot said. Based on what? The symptoms, Munro replied. No wounds, no signs of struggle. Poirot nodded. You have access to medicines, n'est-ce pas? Yes, Munro said sharply. As do many doctors, and you were a close friend. Munro looked away. Once, Eleanor Ashford-Eleanor trembled visibly. I only followed orders, she insisted. Sir Reginald trusted me. And yet, Poirot said gently, You delivered the final documents to him last night. Yes, but I left immediately. Poirot noted the tear that slipped down her cheek. James Fletcher. The chauffeur stood stiffly, cap in hand. I locked the doors at 8, he said. No one left or entered. Poirot raised an eyebrow. And the windows? Latched, sir. Poirot thanked him. When the interviews concluded, Poirot and Inspector Graves returned to the study. It's impossible, Graves muttered. Locked room. No one entered. No weapon found. Poirot gazed thoughtfully at the fire. Impossible, he agreed. Which means, mon ami, that we have not yet asked the right question. Graves frowned. Which is? Poirot turned slowly. Who had access to Sir Reginald before he locked himself inside? The room fell silent. Poirot's little gray cells had begun to hum, somewhere within Hawthorne Manor. The truth waited, hidden behind 10 carefully constructed lies. And Christmas, Poirot reflected, was the perfect time for secrets to surface. Part 4. A crime wrapped as an accident by midday. Inspector Graves had settled comfortably into the role he knew best, restoring order through simplicity. The official explanation, he declared, was shaping itself nicely. Poisoned drink, he said. Standing near the desk in Sir Reginald's private drawing room. Probably mistaken. A sleeping draft, perhaps. Man was nervous, overworked, Christmas pressure. He gestured toward the shattered glass. Accidents like this happen. Hercule Poirot listened politely, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes drifting about the room. He saw not what was present, but what was absent. An accident, Poirot repeated thoughtfully. Yes, Graves said firmly. No forced entry. Door locked from the inside. No weapon. No motive strong enough to outweigh the risk. Poirot smiled faintly. And yet, mon ami, accidents do not usually send warnings. He removed the folded note from his pocket and placed it upon the desk. Before Christmas ends, Graves frowned. Could be coincidence. Coincidence, Poirot said gently, is a word used when one lacks imagination. He crouched near the fireplace and examined the ashes. The fire burned low, carefully maintained. Someone wished the room to remain warm. For comfort, Graves said. For time, Poirot corrected. They examined the glass fragments. Poirot picked one up with a handkerchief. No smell of bitter almonds. Graves noted. Not all poisons announce themselves. Poirot replied. The doctor entered quietly. Inspector, Monroe said. I examined the body again. Death was quick. Within minutes. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Then Sir Reginald did not work long at his desk. No, Monroe admitted. Which is strange, given the papers. Poirot turned to Graves. An accident requires chance. This requires precision. Graves crossed his arms. You're suggesting murder, but how? Poirot approached the door and examined the lock. Locked from the inside, he murmured. So it appears. He looked at the windows. Closed. Latched. But were they opened earlier? Fletcher cleared his throat. I locked them at dusk. Poirot nodded. Dusk is not midnight. A silence fell. Poirot paced slowly. Sir Reginald was summoned here. He drank from a glass. He died. Someone ensured privacy. Someone ensured the door would appear locked. Graves scoffed. You're reaching. Poirot stopped abruptly. No, he said quietly. I am remembering something you have forgotten. He lifted the glass stopper from a decanter on the sideboard. This decanter was used at dinner, Poirot said. But this glass was not. Graves blinked. Meaning? Meaning someone prepared a drink after dinner. They searched the room again. Under the desk, Poirot found a faint smear, almost invisible. Wine, Graves said. No, Poirot replied. Ink. He straightened slowly. Sir Reginald was handed a document. He read. He drank. He died. The document was missing. Graves exhaled sharply. So you think someone delivered poison earlier? Poirot nodded, long before the room was locked. A clock chimed softly in the hallway. Poirot looked up. Christmas Eve is a time of schedules, he said. Dinner, brandy, midnight bells. He turned to Graves, and the killer used the schedule to hide the crime. Graves looked unconvinced, but uneasy. If you're right, he said slowly, then the murderer never entered this room after 8. Precisely, Poirot replied. The truth was no longer impossible, that it was merely inconvenient. Part 5, the Christmas Eve plot time. Hercule Poirot, often reflected, was the most underestimated accomplice in crime. Not poison, not opportunity, but timing. The morning after Christmas arrived without cheer. Snow continued to fall in slow, deliberate silence, as though the world itself wished to hide Hawthorne Manor from consequence. Inside, clocks ticked loudly in every room, a reminder that time, once spent, could never be reclaimed. Poirot sat alone in Sir Reginald's private drawing room. The room was exactly as it had been left after the discovery of the body. Inspector Graves had ordered nothing disturbed. Papers lay scattered on the desk. The fire had long since gone cold. The air still held the faint trace of brandy. Poirot closed his eyes. He was not looking for objects. He was reconstructing moments. Sir Reginald leaves the guests at approximately 8:05 p.m. He walks directly to this room. He locks the door. He does not return. Death occurs between 8:10 and 8:20. Too quick. Poirot opened his eyes sharply. Too quick, he murmured again. If Sir Reginald intended to work, why summon Poirot later? Why pour a drink immediately? Why no sign of prolonged activity? The answer was simple. He had not planned to stay long. Someone had arranged for him to come here, briefly, and to die. A soft knock interrupted Poirot's thoughts. Enter, he said. It was Eleanor Ashford. She looked exhausted. Her eyes shadowed, her hands clenched tightly together. You wish to see me, Monsieur Poirot? Yes, mademoiselle, Poirot said gently. Please sit. She obeyed. Poirot folded his hands. You delivered documents to Sir Reginald last night? Yes. At what time? Just after dinner. About 5 minutes after he left the drawing room. And how long were you here? Less than a minute. He barely looked at me. Poirot nodded. Did he drink anything then? Eleanor hesitated. No, the glass was empty. Poirot smiled faintly. That was important. After Eleanor left, Poirot summoned James Fletcher. You locked the house at 8, Poirot said. Double quotes. Yes, sir. And before 8? I was assisting Mrs. Bell with her luggage. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Luggage? On Christmas Eve? Fletcher shifted uncomfortably. She intended to leave early this morning. Poirot thanked him and dismissed him. Piece by piece, the evening rearranged itself. Poirot stood and walked slowly around the desk. He opened drawers, examined papers. Most were harmless: correspondence, bills, business notes. But something was missing. Not stolen in panic. Removed deliberately. Poirot rang the bell. Inspector Graves entered, his patience thinning. You've been here for hours, Graves said. Found anything solid? Poirot gestured toward the chair. Sit, mon ami. Let us discuss time. Graves sighed but sat. Sir Reginald did not die because he locked himself in this room, Poirot began. He died because someone knew exactly when he would be here. Graves frowned. You're saying the schedule killed him? Precisely. Poirot stood. Christmas Eve follows. Ritual, dinner, coffee, brandy, midnight. He tapped the desk. Murderer used ritual as camouflage. Graves leaned forward despite himself. The poison, Poirot continued. was not placed in the glass after Sir Reginald arrived. That's impossible, Graves said. Who would do it earlier? Poirot smiled. Someone with access. Someone unnoticed. Someone trusted. Graves' expression darkened. Poirot moved to the sideboard. The decanter, he said. Shared at dinner. But Sir Reginald poured nothing here. He lifted the stopper again. The poison was introduced before dinner, into a personal bottle. One Sir Reginald alone would later use. Graves' eyes widened slightly. But the timing, Poirot said softly. The brilliance of it. He leaned closer. The poison was slow acting. Not hours, minutes. Enough to allow Sir Reginald to walk here, lock the door, and die alone. Graves stood abruptly. Then anyone who handled that drink earlier is our murderer. Poirot finished. Silence filled the room. Poirot straightened his jacket. And now, he said calmly, we ask the most dangerous question of all. Graves swallowed. Which is? Poirot turned toward the door, where voices echoed faintly from the hallway. Who knew Sir Reginald's habits well enough to predict his final moments? Before Christmas ended, outside, a clock struck noon. Time, Poirot knew, was running out for someone. Part 6, False Clues and Red Herrings. The afternoon sunlight slanted weakly through the frosted windows of Hawthorne Manor, casting long shadows across the drawing rooms and corridors. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted. What was once polite tension had turned into quiet suspicion. A web spun so tightly that even the most trivial movement caused tremors of anxiety. Every glance, every cough, every gesture was now under scrutiny. And Hercule Poirot watched them all with clinical precision, his little gray cells operating at full throttle. Inspector Graves had summoned all the guests to the library. The room smelled faintly of pine and wax polish. Outside, the snow continued its silent descent. Muffling sound, as though the house were insulated against intrusion or escape. Poirot rose from his chair and surveyed the gathered group. Victoria Hawthorne, pale and composed, stood near the fireplace. Her hands were clasped tightly, knuckles white. Charles Hawthorne slouched in a chair, attempting casualness but failing. Margaret Bell's sharp eyes flickered between everyone, silently calculating. Dr. Alistair Munro stood stiffly at the edge, papers in hand, the faint scent of his cologne mingling with the stale warmth of the room. Eleanor Ashford hovered timidly near the doorway. James Fletcher remained calm, yet the lines of his face betrayed anxiety. Even the servants, who had been called to witness the questioning, shifted uneasily on their feet. Poirot cleared his throat. Ms. Amos, he said, we have reached an interesting moment. Sir Reginald Hawthorne is dead. That is evident. But the matter of how and why remains complex. And complexity, as you know, is often obscured by appearances. He walked slowly around the group, glancing at each person in turn. Let us examine what is obvious, and then we shall consider the less obvious. First red herring. The torn letter. Poirot picked up a small, crumpled scrap of paper from the mantelpiece. This, he said, was found beneath Sir Reginald's chair after his unfortunate demise. Torn from a larger sheet, it reads. He held it up. Guests leaned forward. The truth will be known. Inspector Graves looked skeptical. It was an angry note, perhaps a threat from someone resentful. Poirot shook his head. Not a threat, my friend. A distraction. Someone wished the attention to move here. It diverts suspicion from the true motive. Victoria frowned. So someone wanted to make it look like revenge? Exactly, Poirot said. But the handwriting is too deliberate. Notice the uniform slant, the carefully drawn letters. Too polished for haste. Someone who writes carefully does not make mistakes. Graves muttered. So it's fake? Precisely. A red herring. Second red herring. The poisoned brandy decanter. Poirot moved to the sideboard. The decanter of brandy gleamed innocently, as though daring anyone to touch it. This decanter, Poirot began, was shared at dinner. Inspector Graves believed this to be the source of poison. Yet we know Sir Reginald poured his drink here, and the poison, as I deduced yesterday, could not have been introduced after he left. Someone has attempted to make it appear otherwise. Dr. Monroe stepped forward. But all the brandy glasses were cleaned. Any residue? Poirot tapped the stopper. Surface clean. But the true poison was isolated, hidden within a personal vessel, not this communal decanter. The intent was to mislead anyone who looked only at the obvious. Third red herring, suspicious behavior. Poirot now addressed the group with sharp eyes. Suspicion naturally falls upon the nervous, the defensive, or the resentful. Each of you has shown, in varying degrees, signs of stress. Yet stress is not proof. A carefully planned crime relies upon the observer's assumptions. He turned to Charles. You were in debt. Anger or desperation is obvious. But you did not act last night. Charles opened his mouth to protest, but Poirot cut him off. To assume motive is to ignore method. Remember, the murderer acted with precision, using timing. Emotion is distraction. Poirot then turned to Margaret Bell. Your dislike of Sir Reginald is known, yet your movements last night were accounted for. You are a perfect decoy. Everyone assumes malice, yet your hands are clean. Margaret's lips pressed thin, but she said nothing. Poirot's gaze softened as he looked at Eleanor Ashford. You, timid one, may seem unimportant, yet the unobserved often move unseen. The murderer depends upon invisibility, not violence. Eleanor trembled. Monsieur, she, Poirot said gently. Patience, mademoiselle. We shall see. A fourth clue. The mysterious footprints. Poirot moved to the corridor. Examine these footprints in the fresh snow outside Sir Reginald's window. Guests leaned closer. Inspector Graves squinted. They appear normal. Ah, said Poirot, but notice their direction. They lead away from the room and stop abruptly. No one entered. No one left. The killer moved cleverly, leaving the evidence to suggest intrusion. Victoria gasped. So it's staged? Exactly, Poirot said. A cunning plan to manipulate perception. The eye believes what it wishes. The mind, however, can be deceived. The trap within the trap. Poirot returned to the drawing room. His little gray cells spinning furiously. The murderer, he said. Voice calm but firm, has used three main techniques: diversion, assumption, and confidence. By creating false clues, they shifted suspicion. By exploiting habitual observation, they moved unseen. And by counting on trust, they ensured no one suspected the obvious. Graves frowned. Then the killer is among us, Poirot said simply, and clever enough to make everyone else think they are clever. But cleverness, my friends, has limits. It is the small details that betray intention. Poirot paused, glancing around the library. The torn letter, the decanter, nervous behavior, the footprints, all are false paths, roads that lead nowhere. The truth lies hidden in the mundane, in habits, in tiny deviations that no one has noticed. Silence descended. Every guest's gaze flickered. Fear, uncertainty, and fascination mixed in the air. Psychological tension builds. Poirot leaned forward. Some of you may ask, why involve us? Why not strike and vanish? The answer is simple: arrogance. The murderer believes themselves untouchable, cleverer than we allow. And in their arrogance, they reveal small truths. Victoria whispered, You mean someone made mistakes? Poirot's mustache twitched. Not mistakes exactly. Calculated risks. But no human plan is flawless. Even the most careful timing cannot erase subtle signs. Graves sighed. So we follow the subtle signs, not the obvious. Exactly, Poirot said. And that, my friends, is why we shall uncover the murderer before the day ends. Before Christmas is truly over. Part 7. A second shock. The snow had thickened overnight, blanketing Hawthorne Manor in a suffocating white silence. The world outside seemed frozen in anticipation, and within the manor, tension hung heavier than the damp winter air. Each guest moved like a careful actor, performing politeness while concealing unease. Every glance, every hesitated word, every shift in posture was scrutinized by Hercule. Poirot's penetrating eyes. It was barely past morning when the first signs of disturbance appeared. A servant rushed into the breakfast room, breathless and wide-eyed. Sir, it's the kitchen," she stammered. Poirot and Inspector Graves followed immediately, the guest trailing behind in growing alarm. Inside the kitchen, chaos reigned. Pans and utensils lay scattered, flour dusted the floor, and the maid stood frozen in fear. At the center, collapsed near the pantry door, was James Fletcher, the steadfast chauffeur. His face was pale, his eyes barely open. What happened? Graves demanded. Poirot knelt beside Fletcher, examining him carefully. He is alive, but barely conscious. Symptoms suggest poisoning, yes, but different from the previous case. Dr. Monroe pushed through the crowd, examining Fletcher. "Cyanide," he whispered, horror evident. He must have ingested it accidentally. Or someone gave it to him deliberately. Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the room. Or perhaps, deliberately placed to create panic. The guests murmured among themselves. Margaret Bell's lips pressed tightly. Victoria clutched the back of a chair. Charles's face paled as he realized the implications. Poirot stood slowly, speaking with quiet authority. Notice the pattern. The first victim died in his private study. The second victim, someone closely associated with the household's movement, has been attacked in the kitchen, the very heart of domestic operations. Someone is sending a message. Graves shook his head. But the first was deliberate. This could be an accident. "No, Inspector," Poirot said sharply. "Accidents do not follow a plan. Two separate attacks, each calculated and precisely timed, suggest intelligence, the intelligence of a mind that wishes to control perception, stir fear, and obscure the truth. The second crime reveals a pattern." Poirot moved to examine the kitchen more closely. He crouched, studying the floor. Footprints led to Fletcher's pantry station, but then abruptly ended. The powdery flour on the floor obscured part of the trail, but subtle impressions in the snow-laden bootprints outside. The back kitchen door suggested someone had entered and left deliberately. Poirot rose and addressed the group. "Notice how the second incident is connected to the first. Both victims had access to the inner workings of the household. Both were in locations expected to be safe. Both incidents occurred at moments predicted by the murderer." Victoria whispered, "But why target Fletcher? He barely knows Sir Reginald." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Ah, mademoiselle, that is precisely why. The murderer is clever. Fletcher is part of the household's daily rhythm. By attacking him, they demonstrate that no one is safe, even those seemingly insignificant. Panic forces mistakes. Panic provokes revelation." Graves frowned. "So this is psychological manipulation?" "Exactly, Inspector. And very effective." A discovery in Fletcher's pocket. Poirot turned Fletcher gently onto his side and found a small scrap of paper clutched in his hand. Unfolding it carefully, Poirot read aloud, "Watch the hands that serve. Watch the eyes that see too much. Before the hour is done, truth will be revealed." A hush fell. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Notice the handwriting. Deliberate, yet hurried. Someone wishes us to see the note, yet mislead us at the same time. Observe the contradiction. Fear is instilled, but clues are planted. Red herrings, my friends, red herrings. Margaret's hands tightened around her muffler. So, we are being toyed with? Poirot inclined his head gravely. Yes, madame. The murderer thrives on confusion. They are orchestrating fear as carefully as a conductor leads an orchestra. Interrogation intensifies. Poirot gathered the household in the drawing room where the first murder had occurred. He seated them strategically, noting their reactions. Victoria Hawthorne's composure had cracked. She was tense, yet controlled. Charles Hawthorne appeared anxious, his eyes darting to every movement. Margaret Bell's mask of calm hid curiosity and alarm. Dr. Munro, though professional, had a faint tremor in his fingers. Eleanor Ashford seemed the most vulnerable, yet her eyes revealed a keen awareness. James Fletcher, still recovering, leaned weakly against the chair, wary of the others. Poirot began. Each of you will recount, precisely, your movements between 8 o'clock last night and the time of discovery this morning. Precision is crucial. He listened carefully. Notes were taken. Cross-examinations occurred. He detected contradictions, half-truths, and omissions. Some were minor, some significant. Poirot leaned back in his chair. The murderer has knowledge of the household's routine and uses it to time their actions. This knowledge cannot be acquired quickly. It is intimate, detailed, and deliberate. The psychological impact, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Guests whispered among themselves. Glances exchanged loaded with suspicion. The manor felt like a cage. Each individual considered, could one of us commit such acts? And in this consideration, they inadvertently revealed themselves. Poirot reflected, the murderer is clever, bold, and arrogant. They assume the observer underestimates them. They manipulate perception, planting false evidence and orchestrating events to produce fear. And fear, he knew, is the most potent tool of all. Observe, Inspector, Poirot said, pointing at the assembled guests, the subtle signals, the almost imperceptible reactions. The guilty, even when silent, cannot fully mask themselves. Graves exhaled. So we are hunting behavior, not just clues? Exactly. Behavior, timing, and deviation from the ordinary. The criminal's hubris becomes their undoing. Even the most careful plotting leaves traces, not in objects, but in how humans react to the manipulation of fear. A silent realization as the afternoon waned. The snow outside had thickened to a storm. Guests were confined to the manor, unable to leave. Suspicion had begun to fester. Families turned inward. Alliances formed and broke in whispers. Every glance was measured. Every word calculated. Poirot remained quiet for long stretches, observing, taking notes in a small leather-bound notebook. Then, finally he spoke, his voice calm but carrying the weight of revelation. 2 attacks, each carefully timed. 2 victims, each critical to the household. The second attack was not random. It was a message. And messages are always for someone. The murderer is attempting to manipulate the entire household, to control perception, to force errors. And now, we are beginning to see the pattern emerge. The room fell silent. The storm outside whipped against the windows, echoing the tension inside. Every eye turned to Poirot, silently demanding the answer he had not yet given. Poirot's mustache twitched. The second shock has narrowed our suspects. The first attack showed us intent. The second shows us method. And in the method lies the path to truth. Graves whispered, "You know who it is?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, mon ami. We are close. But close is not the same as certainty. Observation, patience, and the little gray cells. These shall guide us." Part 8. The past comes back. The storm outside Hawthorne Manor raged unchecked. Snow swirling in blinding sheets, as though the heavens themselves wished to hide the truth from prying eyes. Inside, the atmosphere was equally turbulent. Fear, suspicion, and uncertainty had seeped into every corner, every hallway, every glance exchanged between the guests. The manor felt less like a home and more like a cage, the walls pressing in with silent accusations. Hercule Poirot sat alone in the study, reviewing his notes meticulously. Each detail of the past 2 murders, the strange notes left for the household, and the subtle psychological manipulations were recorded, catalogued, and analyzed in his mind. The puzzle was intricate, but pieces were beginning to fall into place. Yet a shadow lingered over the present, the past. Every crime, Poirot murmured to himself, has roots. Motive is the offspring of history. We must dig into the past to uncover the present. He summoned Victoria Hawthorne first. The young woman entered with cautious grace, her composure intact, yet her eyes betraying the worry that had been gnawing at her for the past 24 hours. Mademoiselle, Poirot began gently, I wish to speak of family history, the past of the Hawthorne line. I ask you to be truthful. Truth, after all, is the foundation upon which justice is built. Victoria swallowed and nodded. I will answer your questions, Monsieur Poirot. A family secret revealed. Poirot leaned forward, fingers steepled. Tell me about your father's business dealings in the early 1900s, before your time, before the present generation. Victoria hesitated. My father, he was ambitious. Some say ruthless. He inherited the company from his father, but expanded aggressively. Competitors disappeared, fortunes were lost, and there were scandals, but much of it was kept secret. Poirot's eyes twinkled with recognition. And enemies? Victoria nodded. Yes, old business partners. Family disputes. One particular grievance, between Sir Reginald and a distant cousin, I believe, named Hawthorne Finch. It was resolved publicly, but the bitterness remained. Interesting, Poirot murmured. Tell me about this cousin. Victoria looked uneasy. He disappeared many years ago. There was talk of an accident during a winter voyage. My father inherited the family fortune shortly afterward. Poirot's mustache twitched. A conveniently timed disappearance. Interesting indeed. Another witness, Margaret Belle. Poirot called Margaret Belle next. The sister-in-law, sharp-eyed and composed, entered the study like a general into her command post. Margaret, the past. Family grudges, old feuds. Tell me what you know, Poirot said. Margaret's lips pressed thin, her eyes narrowing. Sir Reginald was not a man to forget slights, not even minor ones. He held grudges. Some went on for decades. There was a relative, a business partner long ago, who believed he was cheated. And there were servants, loyal ones whose families were wronged by Reginald's decisions. I've always warned Victoria, past debts are never truly paid. Poirot nodded. And threats? Letters? Warnings? Margaret hesitated. There were rumors, whispered conversations in the servants' quarters. But who would act after so many years? Surely the time has passed. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Time never passes, madame. It waits. And sometimes, the weight of a past injustice is unbearable enough to drive one to extreme measures. Reconstructing the past, Poirot sat back, rubbing his chin. He had begun to reconstruct the network of old grudges, debts, and hidden resentments. The disappearance of Hawthorne Finch years ago. Old rivalries and jealousies within the extended family. Disgruntled employees or descendants thereof, now adults with knowledge and motive. Secret inheritances and potential financial motives. Poirot realized the murders were not simply about wealth or revenge for recent slights. They were the culmination of decades-old grudges, patiently nurtured, carefully executed at a time when the household would be most vulnerable. Christmas Eve, when everyone trusts one another. Yet secrets run deepest. A hidden letter surfaces. Poirot requested the housekeeper bring all Sir Reginald's personal correspondence. Hours passed as letters, diaries, and old journals were sorted and examined. Amidst the piles, Poirot found a fragile envelope, yellowed with age, addressed in careful flowing script. To Reginald Hawthorne. I have waited 20 years. On the night of your greatest celebration, I shall have justice. Poirot's finger traced the words. The past is spoken, he murmured. And now it acts. He turned to Inspector Graves. Observe, mon ami, the handwriting. Familiar, methodical, but aged. Deliberate. Someone has planned for years. They watched the household, learned the habits, and chose this precise night. Christmas Eve, a night of routine, expectation, and distraction. Graves looked astonished. So it's personal. Not just greed. But personal and financial can intersect, Inspector. The past, when wielded with patience and cunning, becomes a weapon as sharp as any dagger. Connecting the murders to history, Poirot began piecing together the timeline. Sir Reginald's first death, in his private study, carefully orchestrated through timing and poison. James Fletcher's near-fatal poisoning, targeted as a warning or perhaps to test the household's reaction. Old grievances resurfacing, letters and notes, suggest revenge connected to a family scandal decades old. Poirot's deductions sharpened. Each action, each note, each subtle manipulation pointed to someone with intimate knowledge of the house. Long-standing personal vendetta. Patience to orchestrate events over decades. The murderer was not hasty. They were meticulous. And most importantly, they had allowed the past to dictate the present. The first lead emerges. Poirot summoned the household once again. He stood before them, his expression calm, yet with an intensity that made even the boldest suspect uneasy. Ms. Amos, he said, we have discovered that these crimes are not the result of random malice. They are the product of history. A carefully plotted series of events, motivated by old grievances, hidden truths, and long-nurtured resentment. Someone here, or connected closely to this household, has waited decades for the moment to act. And they have chosen Christmas Eve, the time of routine, tradition, and distraction, to strike. A tense silence followed. The storm outside howled, rattling the windows, as if echoing the realization of the guests. The past is never truly gone. Poirot's eyes swept across the group, landing on each in turn. The past has returned. It has a voice. And tonight, we shall finally hear it speak clearly. Part 9. Poirot's Christmas revelation. The storm had finally begun to wane, leaving Hawthorne Manor cloaked in a ghostly silence, broken only by the occasional groan of timber and the soft crunch of snow underfoot. The household gathered once again in the grand drawing room, candles flickering in their silver holders, their light casting long shadows that danced along the paneled walls. Each guest sat tensely, aware that this meeting, called by Hercule Poirot, would not be ordinary. Poirot stood near the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, his sharp eyes scanning the room with a patience that unnerved even the most confident of observers. The little gray cells had worked tirelessly, weaving together clues, motives, and observations gathered over the past 48 hours. Tonight, the truth would finally emerge. Ms. Amos, Poirot began, his voice calm yet resonant. We have endured fear, confusion, and uncertainty. We have seen the past return to life in a manner both cruel and precise. The events of this Christmas Eve were not random. They were planned. And the perpetrator, yes, the murderer, is among us. A sharp intake of breath passed through the room. Charles shifted uneasily in his chair. Victoria clutched her shawl. Margaret Bell's composure tightened like a drawn bow. Eleanor Ashford trembled, while Dr. Monroe remained outwardly calm but visibly anxious. Poirot continued, pacing slowly before the group. We have observed 2 attacks. First, Sir Reginald Hawthorne, poisoned in his private study. Second, Mr. James Fletcher, nearly fatally poisoned in the kitchen. Both attacks were carefully timed. Both relied on the predictability of the household. And both were intended not merely to harm, but to send a message. A message that demanded attention, obedience, and fear. Inspector Graves cleared his throat. Monsieur Poirot, are you saying that the second attack was deliberate? That someone wanted to frighten the household? Poirot inclined his head. Yes, Inspector. The first attack removed the central figure, the patriarch. The second attack targeted one who maintains the rhythm of the household. By striking Mr. Fletcher, the murderer demonstrated that no one is safe, no role insignificant, and no routine unobserved. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then, with a subtle motion of his hand, he produced the scraps of notes found after both incidents. The letters, the warnings, the hints, each was a misdirection. Each was intended to manipulate perception, to direct suspicion away from the truth, and to create the illusion of randomness and chaos. Poirot's eyes swept the room. And yet, the truth is always revealed by the ordinary, the unnoticed, the habitual. Every human being has routines, habits, and reactions. The murderer relied on these, and in doing so, revealed themselves. Reconstructing the crime, Poirot stepped toward the fireplace and held up a small bottle. This bottle contained the poison administered to Sir Reginald. Notice, Ms. Amos, it was not placed haphazardly. It was selected for timing. A poison that acts slowly, yet precisely, allowing the victim to reach the location chosen by the murderer, locking the door, and dying alone. He moved to the sideboard, pointing at the decanter. The communal brandy decanter was a red herring, a diversion. The second victim, Mr. Fletcher, found nearly poisoned, was intended to reinforce fear and misdirection. Both attacks were calculated to manipulate the household's perception and to exploit human assumptions. Poirot then turned his gaze sharply on the group. We must now consider motive. Why? Why plan such intricate vengeance? Why orchestrate fear with such precision? He gestured toward Margaret Bell. You have long-standing resentment against Sir Reginald. Your grievances are well known. But your movements, your actions last night, have been accounted for. You are an obvious suspect, the perfect decoy. The murderer relies on the observer's assumptions. You are innocent of these crimes. Next, he addressed Charles Hawthorne. You were desperate for funds. You might have wished harm upon your uncle. But your presence was noted, and your behavior, while nervous, is consistent with fear, not guilt. You are also innocent. Victoria Hawthorne met his eyes. Poirot smiled gently. You feared for your father. You were clever, observant, but your innocence is revealed in your calculated calm. You did not act. Dr. Monroe shifted in his seat. Poirot's gaze fixed on him. You have access to medicines, yes, and you declared the method of death accurately. But your motives are benign. You are guided by professional duty, not vengeance. Innocent, too. Finally, Poirot looked at Eleanor Ashford. Her hands trembled slightly. Mademoiselle, you are small, timid, and seemingly insignificant. Yet your attentiveness has been noted. You delivered documents to Sir Reginald. You were present, but unobtrusive. And yet, Poirot's eyes twinkled. The key clue is subtle. Observe how the letters were placed, how the poisoned vessel was introduced, and the way the second attack was staged. Only someone intimately familiar with the household's routines could orchestrate such events with precision. The room grew still. Every breath was measured. The air seemed to thicken. Poirot's mustache twitched as he finally declared, "The murderer is Margaret Bell's niece, Miss Helena Whitford." A collective gasp rose. "Helena?" Victoria cried. "She isn't even staying here." Poirot nodded. "Ah, but she was. In disguise as a distant cousin visiting for the holidays." She had intimate knowledge of the household, access to letters, knowledge of habits, and a motive buried in the past. Her father, disinherited by Sir Reginald decades ago, nurtured a hatred that Helena inherited and perfected. She planned, timed, and executed with cold calculation, relying on human assumptions and fear to shield her actions. Inspector Graves stepped forward. How did she manage access to the poisoned vessels? Poirot smiled faintly. Observe the ordinary. The same hands that serve tea, pour brandy, and arrange papers, these hands carried poison unnoticed. She manipulated timing, household routine, and the psychology of trust. Every action was deliberate. Helena Whitford, who had entered quietly during the meeting, now revealed herself, her composure unraveling. I did it," she whispered. "For my father. For our family. He was robbed of his inheritance and the house. The fortune, it belonged to us." Poirot stepped closer. "Yes, mademoiselle. But greed, when married to patience and meticulous observation, is no excuse for murder. The past may return, but it cannot excuse crime." The room was silent. The storm outside had finally abated, leaving a crisp, white world beyond the windows. Within, justice had been restored, though the scars of fear, suspicion, and long-held grudges remained. Poirot concluded quietly, almost to himself, Christmas Eve is a time of tradition, routine, and reflection. Yet even amidst celebration, the past can rise to claim the present. And it is the careful observer, guided by reason, patience, and the little gray cells who prevails. Part 10. Truth Before Midnight. The drawing room of Hawthorne Manor was still, the only sound the faint tick of the antique clock above the fireplace. Outside, the snow lay in thick drifts, muting all noise, turning the world into a quiet, frozen tableau. Inside, the atmosphere was tense yet electric. Every eye followed Hercule Poirot, knowing that the final revelation, the unmasking of the murderer, was imminent. Poirot stood, his small frame exuding authority and calm. His little gray cells had been at work ceaselessly, connecting the threads of time, motive, and opportunity. The house had been thoroughly examined. Every clue accounted for, every red herring dissected, and the complex web of past and present reconciled. "Ms. Amos," Poirot began, his voice gentle yet commanding, "we are gathered here on the night following tragedy and confusion. The past has returned in the form of deception, revenge, and calculation. 2 lives were imperiled, 1 taken, 1 nearly lost, and the threads of this intricate plot have now been traced to their source." The guests shifted, some unnerved, others wide-eyed with anticipation. "Before we proceed," Poirot continued, "I must first explain the methodology of the murderer. Observe carefully. The crimes relied upon timing, psychological manipulation, and intimate knowledge of the household's routines. A carefully orchestrated sequence designed to mislead, frighten, and ultimately conceal the truth. Yet, even in the cleverest of schemes, human nature betrays the criminal." The culprit revealed, Poirot turned slowly to the far side of the room. Helena Whitford stepped forward. A young woman emerged from the shadows. Her posture was erect, but the flicker of anxiety in her eyes betrayed her composure. The room held its breath, Poirot's gaze fixed upon her. "You have confessed to the acts, yes. But confession alone does not convey the full story. You acted not in a moment of passion, but with the patience of years. You studied this house, its inhabitants, and the patterns of their lives. You understood the influence of timing and routine, and you used it to orchestrate your crimes. But even the most meticulous planning cannot conceal subtle signs of guilt." Helena's hands trembled slightly. I had to do it. My father was wronged, disinherited by Sir Reginald. We were cheated of what was rightfully ours. I had to restore justice for my family." Poirot's expression softened slightly, though his tone remained firm. Revenge, mademoiselle, is not justice. And the law mise à mis does not condone taking life, regardless of perceived grievances. Yet in your cleverness, you have left traces of truth, deviations in habit, minute inconsistencies, and subtle clues in the timing and execution of your plan. These betrayals led us here tonight. Inspector Graves stepped forward, stern and resolute. Helena Whitford, you are under arrest for the murder of Sir Reginald Hawthorne and the attempted murder of James Fletcher. Any resistance will be met with the full authority of the law. Helena's composure broke. Her shoulders slumped. I suppose it was inevitable, but I did what I thought was necessary. Poirot shook his head gently. Mon ami, necessity does not justify murder. The past can influence the present, but it cannot excuse crime. And now, justice shall be served. Explaining the crimes, Poirot moved to the center of the room. Spreading his hands over the scattered notes and letters recovered from the house, observe the sequence of events carefully. Sir Reginald's death was not random. The poison was introduced into a vessel he would personally use. Its effect was delayed, allowing him to reach the private study, lock the door, and die as planned by the murderer. The second attack, targeting James Fletcher, was designed to instill fear, to test the reactions of the household, and to reinforce the illusion of unpredictability. He paused, scanning the faces around him. The letters and notes, the apparent red herrings, all were designed to mislead, to manipulate the perception of the observers. The murderer relied upon the assumption that humans trust routine, and they exploited it brilliantly. Yet human behavior, even when calculated, leaves subtle signs, hesitation, glances, small contradictions in movements that reveal the truth. Victoria spoke softly, her voice trembling. And the motive? It was only revenge for her father. Poirot nodded. Yes, but it was compounded by a desire for wealth and recognition, long-buried resentments, and careful observation over years. The past returned, using patience, fear, and calculation as its instruments. The household reacts, the household exhaled collectively, the tension slowly uncoiling. Victoria Hawthorne reflected on her father's life, his decisions, and the hidden dangers of long-standing grudges. Charles Hawthorne realized the folly of financial recklessness and the value of honesty. Margaret Bell confronted the consequences of allowing resentment to fester over decades. Dr. Monroe resumed his duties quietly, reassured that reason and justice prevailed. Eleanor Ashford felt a mixture of relief and lingering fear, understanding that trust must be earned carefully. Inspector Graves meticulously recorded the final deductions, grateful for Poirot's unparalleled insight. Poirot himself observed quietly, his small gray eyes gleaming. Mise à mis, the past influences the present, but observation, reason, and patience conquer deception. Christmas Eve, with its rituals and routines, was the stage for crime. Yet the truth, hidden among habits and small details, has been revealed. Justice, though delayed, has arrived before the midnight hour. Closure and reflection. The manor, once tense with fear, began to feel alive again. Candles burned steadily, snow glistened in the moonlight, and the household slowly embraced a fragile peace. Conversations resumed in hushed tones, punctuated by reflection and quiet gratitude. Poirot lingered by the fireplace, reflecting on human nature. The cleverest criminal relies upon fear, manipulation, and the assumptions of others. Yet even the smallest inconsistency, a hesitation, a glance, a deviation from routine, can reveal the truth. The little gray cells are patient. They observe. They wait for the perfect moment to illuminate the darkness. Victoria approached him quietly. Monsieur Poirot, what will we learn from this? Poirot's eyes twinkled. That the past is never truly gone, mademoiselle. And that reason, patience, and justice, applied carefully, prevail over even the most intricate of schemes. Outside, The first stars of Christmas night shimmered above Hawthorne Manor. The snow glistened under their light, reflecting purity and calm. Inside, the household, though shaken, had survived the night of deception and fear. Justice had been served, the past confronted, and Christmas, at last, could be celebrated in truth and peace.